Spider-Man Miles Morales serves as a great expansion to 2018's Marvel Spider-Man game, which I openly consider to be the greatest comic book video game I've ever played. With such a great foundation from both a narrative and gameplay perspective as Spider-Man Miles Morales has to work with, it pretty much guarantees that if you enjoyed the first game, then you will end up enjoying this entry. But the question stands on how much Insomniac Studios was able to get done with so little, and does it do enough to stand out on its own? The story for Spider-Man Miles Morales takes place immediately after the events of the 2018 Spider-Man game during the holiday season, and Miles and his mother have recently moved to the area of Harlem. Miles hasn't had his powers for very long, and he has been working alongside Peter Parker in order to protect the city. Despite having these new powers, Miles is motivated to be recognized as a great hero on his own instead of just being seen as the other Spider-Man, and he gets his chance to prove himself when Peter has to leave for a trip to Europe, leaving the protection of New York City to Miles. During this time, a new company called Roxxon appears in Harlem presenting a new experimental energy resource, and this causes a new gang called the Underground to emerge, which causes all kinds of destruction across the city, and it's up to Miles to discover what they're after and to stop them. Now, the overall story that is told throughout the game is a good one, however, there are both positive and negative aspects to it. My biggest issue that I had with the game's plot is that because this game is so short, which took me less than 10 hours to complete, compared to the 2018 Spider-Man game, which took me a minimum of 35 hours to complete while spending most of my time focusing on the story, and this game really isn't given much time to focus on any one storyline. The primary threat, which mainly comes from the gang The Underground, have a cool look and design, but their motivations are so poor that I never once took them seriously as a threat over the course of the game's story. And what's more is that the primary storyline that runs throughout the entire game actually repeats a lot of the same story beats from the first game, but lacks any of the emotional impact that the first game had. Miles is not Peter Parker, and it is clear that this game's story is at its strongest when it focuses on story elements that the first game did not follow. So the parts that focus on Miles' lack of experience, him getting used to living in Harlem and helping out his local community, and wanting to find an identity of his own while dealing with some serious personal family drama, are executed well here, even with how little time they are given to play out. And this makes me even more interested to know how much of a role Miles will play in the sure-to-come Spider-Man 2 game that will come out on the PlayStation 5. When it comes to its gameplay, when compared to the 2018 Spider-Man game, it's almost a copy and paste job, so anyone who enjoyed playing that game will easily be able to jump in and get familiar with what to do and how to do it fairly quickly. As an open-world action-adventure title, you will find yourself swinging all around New York City, fighting multiple different enemies and solving a lot of requested problems. I can openly admit that when it comes to making your way all around a large sandbox area like New York, there is no greater experience that I have had than swinging between, around, and over buildings. It was extremely fun in the first game, and it is just as fun here. However, with the addition of some of Miles' exclusive powers, he actually has even more and faster ways to get around the city than Peter does. And this small attention to detail that I happen to notice is actually showing his inexperience that Miles has when it comes to his style of swinging compared to Peter's. And it is fun seeing him pull all kinds of cool little tricks while swinging that anyone can spend hours testing out. When facing the enemies in this game, it is separated into two categories, that being combat and stealth. And something that I have to say right from the beginning that might sound as a small negative, but I think needs to be said right now. The biggest challenge that this game had to face was doing anything and everything it could to make Miles feel different than Peter, and while the game certainly achieves this, it did however come at a price. Over the course of this game, Miles gets a series of different powers that make him feel extremely overpowered, and because of that, this game lost any sense of challenge even on the hardest difficulty. There is no question that when it comes to Spider-Man games, this version of Miles is the single most powerful Spider-Man character I have ever played as in any Spider-Man game ever. In a straight-up combat situation, Miles has a collection of powerful bioelectrical attacks that can do some serious damage to some even the most powerful enemies that you will encounter. There are attacks that are so powerful that they can even take out entire enemies of enemies with no difficulty. And this feeling a bit too powerful carries into the stealth sections as well, because Miles has the power to become invisible, so there really is no need to be too careful in these sections, because if you somehow get spotted, you can just become invisible and enemies will lose complete track of you. And this can even be applied to combat as well. If any chance you find yourself getting into any kind of trouble, you can simply go invisible, and heck, you can bounce back. And this can even be applied to some of the boss fights later on. Now, it is true that they do introduce an enemy type that does have the ability to kind of see you while you're invisible, but to be honest, they were never really much of a factor during my personal playthrough and never had a chance to make this count. As you play through the game and gain experience and collect skill points, you can then use those skill points to purchase new abilities that are separated into 3 different categories. You can also collect spider tokens and special tech points that you can then use to improve any of the 4 primary gadgets that you'll get over the course of the game. And you can actually use these spider tokens and tech points in order to create new suits for Miles to wear. And what's more is that these suits can actually come with special perks that can help you in different scenarios, which really encourages you to wear different suits over the course of the game depending on your current scenario. When you're not focusing on either the main story missions or even side missions, you have this cool little Spider-Man app which actually has a list of local missions that are sent to you for you to complete if you want. There are also a number of creative puzzles that you can solve throughout the game, and when you're not fighting enemies, you can hone your skills with any of the challenging tests that Peter has left for Miles across the city. Even with a game like this that is significantly shorter than the previous game in just about every single department, there is still no lack of things to do to occupy your time while you're playing this game. From a game design perspective, Spider-Man Miles Morales is a well-crafted game, but it did have the advantage of being built off of an already great and established game. The visuals throughout the entire game still look incredible, and while I didn't play this on the PlayStation 5, it was still impressive to look at on my PlayStation 4 Pro. The overall look of the city during the holiday seasons was beautiful, with wonderful skylines to gaze at and seeing snow everywhere made this game a perfectly timed game to play during this time of the year. And there's so much attention to detail that despite having such a great head start, the development team at Insomniac still managed to put in a lot of work into this game. The character models also all look great across the board. However, I still absolutely despise with a passion the new look that they gave for Peter, and if I see that face in Spider-Man 2, then we're gonna have some serious problems. The game also ran incredibly smooth no matter what I was doing, with no frame rate issues and any kind of slowing down, which helps make Spider-Man Miles Morales another great addition to the long line of quality games that you can only experience on PlayStation. Now, in closing, I really enjoyed Spider-Man Miles Morales, and I believe anybody that really enjoyed the first game is absolutely going to want to pick up this game, as it serves as a great expansion to what was already one of the greatest comic book video games of all time, or I would say it's my personal favorite of all time. Now, again, I think Insomniac Studios knew what they were doing with this game, and it's not a full game, so that's why they didn't sell it at full price, and it is considerably short. And with all the additions of all the really overpowered powers that Miles Morales has to work with, this game is going to be considerably easier to get through, so it really does encourage people to actually spend more time doing a lot of the side missions and extra activities to really get the most amount of time with this game, because if you just focus on the story, you're going to get through it relatively quickly. And I think personally that this serves as a kind of semi-preview of what we can expect from Spider-Man 2 when it comes out on the PlayStation 5, because after the ending of this game, I always believed that the second game was going to have us play as both Peter and Miles in order to take on, probably what is, I think the main villain is probably going to be Venom, who's controlled by Harry Osborn, which, trust me, I have a feeling that that is going to be a major adventure, and this serves as a great preview of what we can expect from true next-gen Spider-Man games. So if I had to give Spider-Man Miles Morales a rating, I would give it an 8.5. I think an 8.5 is really good for the amount of quality that you get, and I certainly couldn't quite judge it on the same level as this one because of how short it is. But heck, I do think that this is a must-play title for anyone that really enjoyed this game, and in some elements, it does stand out on its own. So those are my thoughts on Spider-Man Miles Morales. If you happen to enjoy this review, please do not forget to give this video a thumbs up and press the subscribe button if you happen to enjoy content like this and would like to see more from me. And if you happen to play this game, I would like to know what were your thoughts on the game itself. So for that said, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I will see you next time.